So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us at this panel discussion. The goal is to talk about public and private partnerships. The format is there's beautiful colleagues of mine, each representing an ecosystem of public-private partnership. I will invite them to talk through. But before I do that, two important things I do want to mention. One is this joyous occasion is put together by the Maine Broadband Coalition. The Maine Broadband Coalition has been in existence for over 10 years. It's actually first started as a listserv, if you can believe it. And now we are here all together as a community, as partners, private and public, trying to do something very tectonically, generationally effective and impactful. So I think the Maine Broadband Coalition should be congratulated. So during the day, if you see the Maine Broadband Coalition members, staffers, and my thanks to the board members who are here, give them a hug, because it's a journey, it's a long journey, and I think it's a worthwhile journey. The second thing I would like to, the person I'd like to thank is actually Miles. Miles is our erstwhile executive director. This morning I was informed that he hasn't slept much. That is not that great when you're leading a very, very large organization like the Maine Broadband Coalition. So definitely give him a hug and tell him to get some sleep after this is done. We can't have him go to sleep while this is going on. So, but thank you, Miles. So to start, to kick things off, public-private partnerships, as you've heard Heather and Andrew talk about it, and as Nick has mentioned, it is sort of the engine of what we want to get done. We are a very large society. There's 1.3 million people in Maine. It's geographically disparate, diverse. It's a large ecosystem, and it takes a village to build infrastructure. Infrastructure like your roads, utilities, your sewer, your water, all of that stuff is extremely large. It's complicated, complex, nuanced, and has a lot of interdependencies. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of doing. In order to do that, you require partnerships. Partnerships between the private sector and public entities. And so this panel is hopefully going to talk about what makes those things tick. Everybody has a different perspective. It's a different environment for different places, geographic, demographic, and otherwise, or economic. So what are those mechanisms that have been successful in these ecosystems? And hopefully there are some learnings we can provide, lessons we have learned, for you to be able to take to your communities, your ecosystems, because you need to be empowered to work with who you want to work with to get the ball to move forward. As Andrew and Heather mentioned, this is a generational opportunity. We can't, frankly, screw it up. Think of the rural electrification program from the 1920s and 30s. Think of the National Highway Transportation System from the 50s and 60s. We're still living it. In fact, a lot of the stuff we are still doing is on poles. So think about that. The decisions that we are making, you are making as a community, in partnerships, in the way you're making decisions, have generational ramifications and impact. So in that vein of not screwing up, to talk about the things that are working, I'm going to invite first my dear friend Mark to talk about Axiom, partners, and introduce sort of the conversation. Please, Mark.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. We'll see if this works. It does. Look at that technology. So I hate PowerPoint. So just know that at the outset. And I also usually come in at 90 miles an hour on two wheels and just wing it. And I decided to try to be a little bit more intentional today, which is not my style. I also like to talk for a long time, so somebody's going to kick me or raise their hand. So please do that.
I'm going to take care of that.
Okay, you're going to take care of it? All right, Karen.
You don't worry.
Good. Well, I'm happy to be here. My name's Mark. I'm from Axiom Technologies. We're a small service provider based in Machias, Maine. And a long time ago, we embraced community-driven broadband and public-private partnerships, and we're excited to bring a couple of examples of that to you today. This is just to make everybody ooh and ah that I have a pretty slide with colors on it. Essentially, this is our process and how we try to engage and work with communities. One of the things that's important from our perspective that we can do, we do everything from planning to helping people get grants to construction and to operations. So we do soup to nuts. And as a small provider, we've been pretty excited to be partnered with a lot of different types of communities in a lot of different places in Maine, and really to embrace each community's unique way of dealing with things, because every community, if you don't know this already in Maine, we all don't like each other, right? There are 400 and something fiefdoms in Maine, right? Every individual town has its own way, and they don't like the next town over because they compete in basketball or something like that, right? I'm a Biddeford Tiger. I don't like the Trojans in soccer, right? So, you know, that kind of thing. So working with individual communities is really our shtick. We like to do a couple of things in our model. First, we like and work hard to try to make anything we do tax neutral, right? Small communities have a hard time with their tax base, and we like to work closely with them in our model to try to create a situation where no new taxes are required. Second, it's very important to us that we serve every single home in the community, every single home. No matter where they are, no matter how far down the private road, 2 miles off the grid, like in Georgetown, across a little marsh, we will try to serve them. Yeah, you remember that one? Yeah. We will try to serve them, yeah. Terry remembers from Georgetown. We also like to install essentially world-class broadband, right? We're a little tired here in Maine about being the have-nots, right? Maine is a lot of have-nots, right? And we want to take those have-nots and make them haves. And by putting in essentially 10 gig networks, we're creating a future-proof system for the communities in which we work. So we're super excited about that. Our model, town by town, I'll just skip over some of this stuff and then I'll let Carlos speak, but feel free to talk to me or ask questions. Essentially, our model is, right, no new taxes, revenue, and the way we work with communities is a portion of the revenues that come from subscribers, we give back to the town through a formula. And that revenue back to the town helps pay for any borrowing they need to do. It helps them in a number of other issues, insurance, creating a fund to serve people in the future, those kinds of things. So the model is operational now in a handful of communities, and it's just going to be operational in Georgetown when we get done building. Well, it is operational. We're serving customers right now. And there are a couple of other items that in the relationship with the towns that we work closely with about what the town's responsibility and what Axiom's responsibility is in those relationships, and happy to discuss those. There are some benefits to public ownership that I think are important to state, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. I'm certainly not everybody's cup of tea. Axiom's not everybody's cup of tea. But for those who embark on this kind of journey, I think they really want to take control of their own destiny, and that is a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of thing. That's Maine, really Maine, and really important to a lot of communities who just feel like they want to have the relationship, a much better, stronger relationship with the ISP into the future, because they feel like they can deliver a better not just relationship, but just a better solution for those community members in which they are trying to serve. So I think through a public ownership model that happens, right? And they can ensure things like equal access to all, like I was just talking about. They can ensure things like that the ISP acts in particular ways, right? One of the great benefits to the communities that we work with is you get to kick us out, right? You don't like us, we don't perform, you get to put another ISP in if you so choose to do that. So it's a really much more leveraged relationship between the town and the ISP, and we have to act appropriately in that relationship. We're not on our own just deciding what we're going to do when we're going to do. It's really a communication back and forth. We have a pretty cool track record for a little small company. We're in for about $20, $22 million in projects. We have about 16 million in grant monies against those projects. So we've been pretty successful in this environment. One of the things that I used to say when I came to this forum is, don't think about money. Think about money last. Make your goals and move forward, and you'll find a way. Well, money's been taken out of the equation. There's more money than it has ever been in this environment. So if you're thinking about moving forward, now's the time, because it won't be here for that long, a couple, 3 years. And I think for those of you who are new, I think what's really important from my perspective is, remember, you're at least 18 months away from getting service at minimum. Probably more than that if you're going to go get a grant, so you have to follow that round. So, starting now is super important, because you're not going to get service to your constituencies till a couple years from now. It's just a long, hard process. It's a crooked road, and I'll let Carlos talk about that. Axiom and Georgetown are in this relationship that we're building, a little bit different in Georgetown than some of the other communities, but one of the most important things that I used to say that's just as important today is, every town needs a champion. Carlos was that champion. He was the guy who he was a dog with a bone. He would not let this go. So here we are in Georgetown, and I'll let Carlos speak on what's going on there and anything else you'd like to talk about.
Hi, Carlos Berenovo. So this has been a long journey. I'm just looking around the room and seeing how many people I've seen 3 years ago. I just want to introduce myself. I'm not only the Georgetown person, part of the 3-member managing partnership now for Georgetown Broadband, but I'm also on the Maine Connectivity Authority Board, as Andrew mentioned earlier. So I've had kind of a unique perspective on this. This journey has been about 5 years and predated Connect Maine, and it's been a long journey. The thing I want to sort of just get across a couple things here in terms of what is important as you sort of look at how do you want to structure your relationship in your area is, I cannot emphasize enough is understanding what your goal is in your area and then using that as your sort of North Star going forward. Our goal always was, before, was to connect every home in Georgetown with fiber. We went through a process to get to that point where we decided that, but then that was our goal. We went through a number of different iterations, which I don't sort of want to go all through, where we ended up with the structure that we have now. We ended up somewhere we did not think we would have been 3 years ago. We've gone sort of through the evaluation of the municipal owned, the different grants, and where we came out with, but all along, Axiom was our partner in this. And so having a partner that we could rely on, that we could talk to, was really important to understand where we were going and understand what our goal was. I'd say that that's the most important part of all this. I'd say also being flexible about how you're going to get to your goal. Like I said, we started off thinking it would always be municipally owned. At the end of the day, we ended up solving the problem a different way by rallying the community as an investor group and moving forward as an investor group with community support. And I would call it a community-led project all the way through. The financing was different, the structure's different, how we've managed it has been slightly different, but all of the concepts that are important are there. And ultimately, what we've done is we've been able to actually build out a network that's will connect everyone, no matter where they are in Georgetown, and that actually is providing service. And I cannot tell you how exciting it is the moment you actually light up that first home and you actually see all that work come to fruition. But I'd say picking a partner that is going to be with you, that understands your goals and is actually aligned with you and is actually able to be flexible with you is kind of the crucial piece of this. And one of the things that's kind of did not happen when we started this whole journey was we did not have the resources that MCA is going to be providing now on the planning, on financial support, a lot of the things that really make it very difficult for a small community to be able to actually understand and be able to move these projects forward. So you're going to have a lot of different partners, both on MCA level as well as the ability to choose who you're working with on your provider level as well. So you're in a much better shape. But again, what's your goal? Is your goal to do the whole community? Is your goal to fill in those extra? Is your goal how does your community think about how it wants to actually finance things? These are all important things to understand at the start as you start to work with partners. How's that?
Carlos, if I can ask, so
Yeah.
over the years in your partnership with Axiom, what have been the key ingredients that holds that glue together?
I think it's been being able to, Mark and Axiom is also, as you have been involved in all the discussions around Maine and thinking through where are the funding sources, understanding and this is one of the things about Maine providers, really understanding the issues involved with rural construction and broadband, and understanding what the community is interested in. One thing that Mark has always been involved in, or Axiom has been always interested in, is actually engaging with the community, which is difficult because select boards and communities all have different objectives.
Right.
And so there's been a consistency there in talking. As Mark said, it's been, you do need to have champions within the community who are focused. But the secret sauce has been in that, at least having that being able to have a continual conversation around that and understanding what the goals are of the community. So I would say that's part of it. Yep.
Great. So as one of the champions, what are the learnings that the audience can have is in terms of how you manage expectations, how you manage the input of suggestions, demands, desires, ambitions, and be able to coalesce everybody around a shared goal?
Communication, over communicating, putting things in front of not just the select board, but the community, not shutting down conversation, understanding especially, and even now as we roll out broadband, understanding that there are people at very different levels of understanding of what even broadband is, of understanding how it will impact their lives specifically, so communicating, websites, emails, mailing lists, it's a continual conversation. It never really ends. I think all of us on the stage know that the break point, and this was the epiphany for every one of us, was COVID and what happened in our communities during COVID. We've talked a lot about this at the MCA level, and this is how MCA came out, but so that moment allowed us all to be able to communicate with our communities about specifically what they were missing because they were actually missing it. But it's still never take it for granted that people have assumed that. You have to continually message it, and you have to get down to that level of what is it that this will do for you. And I think, and now I get to end with my pitch, which I always do, which is that there will be this moment where these groups, you will all be sitting here and not talking about construction. You'll be talking about how you are leveraging the infrastructure you have spent years and community hours to put into your communities. And that moment is going to be a lot more fun. And I'm really looking forward to that. But today we're still talking about making sure that your community understands and you're finding the correct partners to be able to build that infrastructure. So that's.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Mark, any last?
No, because I'll go on.
Okay,
so I'll just leave it for right now. Thank you for that opportunity.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah.
You're more than welcome. We'll come back. Sarah, please, your perspective and your partnerships.
Sure. So hi, I'm Sarah Davis. I am the Senior Director of Government Affairs. I'm with Consolidated Communications. And we appreciate being invited and asked to join this group. This is a place we don't always find ourselves, and so it's really nice to be here. And I just want to reflect on something before I jump into my presentation. What Carlos is saying is absolutely true. I've been largely sitting with these same people going on 15 years now, talking about connections, and the flavor and the technology has changed over the time. But I think everyone in this room, and certainly everyone on this stage, has a goal of being back here in a few years and no longer talking about infrastructure, about the state of Maine having the infrastructure that's necessary. And something else Mark said, which is really important, and I'll touch on this throughout our presentation, is we're not everybody's cup of tea. We all come at this with different models and offer different things. And you as a community have to understand which one of these partners is best for you. Each one of us brings something different to the table and brings something different to the partnership. And we want to be where we are appreciated and valued and the customers want us. That turns into take rate and that turns into successful models. And so I think those are important things for everyone in all the communities to be thinking about and thinking about what your goals are and which of the providers, or if you're going to go on your own, makes sense for you. So just quickly, we have about 3,400 employees. We have a 46,000-mile network, about 1.5 million connections. We've been around now 127 years. We started as Illinois Consolidated, and we give about 1.5 million annually in community investments. This is our new brand. This is a point of confusion sometimes, so I always like to take a minute to say this. Consolidated, as we moved into a large capital investment we received and transitioning to building fiber, we felt like that really deserved a new branding. Previously, we were providing DSL, which when you went from dial-up to DSL was a very exciting moment. No longer all that exciting, right? Nobody is excited they have DSL service. And so as we transitioned into building fiber, we felt like it really needed its own brand to distinguish that this is something new, this is using the best technology. And we really transformed the way we do business. We spend a lot of time working on customer service, tracking Net Promoter Score. We're at twice the industry average for that currently for our fiber product, because it's really important to us that this really lead in the state of Maine. It be a technology people love and are excited about and are talking about. And this is what it looks like. This is our branding and what you'll see around. And it's still Consolidated Communications. We are extremely upfront about that. It's just a branding for the product. Sometimes people are confused about that. This is sort of our cornerstone of this. Low, open, and transparent pricing is one of our guarantees, and that's what we do here. We are keeping our prices low. We are advertising both what they start at, what they go to, and also being very clear that you don't have to have a contract, because you're getting an introductory price, you're not locked in, any of that. We think you're going to love this product, and so we give you the opportunity to change or leave as you feel free, because we think it's so important. And all of these slides are I believe, are made available or online if anyone has anything. I see a few pictures.
There's a secret sauce password required, but no, I'm just joking.
Okay.
I'm joking.
I would have put all sorts of stuff in then. No, just kidding. So currently, Consolidated is engaging in two ways. So we are very well capitalized. We have a large private investor, and so in one way we're engaging, which is just our own private build, where we are, paying all the money, we are building, and we are completely responsible for the build and the return on investment, and engaging with the communities as we build, but not seeking, any funding or grant funding or any of this money. And so by the end of the year, we'll be at over 150,000 locations in Maine. By the end of 2025, and actually with funding, this may grow. In fact, we hope it does grow, at least over 400,000 locations in Maine. And currently, one of the things we're proud of is we were able to engage with the state of Maine in their middle mile grant, and are proud to be a partner with the state of Maine and hope that they receive that middle mile grant. And then a picture of our gentleman on Long Island lashing fiber. If anyone hasn't seen fiber lash, it's kind of a fun thing to watch. So I'm going to tell you about models in other states because it's kind of interesting, and then I'll get into a lot of the partnerships we had in Maine. So I'll just run through these briefly. Our first model is our New Hampshire model. It sounds pretty similar to what you heard from Mark. This was born out of necessity in New Hampshire. New Hampshire's an interesting place, as we all know. Live free or die. There was no federal funding, and it was perfectly clear in New Hampshire, they weren't even debating it, there was no state money available for broadband funding. And so there was never a question of will it come, here in Maine we were talking about maybe $100 million and all these things. They weren't talking about any of that. So these communities really realized they had to do it on their own. And so we engaged with New Hampshire communities, and they bonded for the money to build the infrastructure. And through that process, those communities acquired ownership of all the infrastructure. They own everything they've bonded for. And then through what we call an infrastructure recovery fee, we remit to them enough money to pay back the principal and interest payments on their bond over the period in which they own the bond. So similar to what Mark says, they have control and ownership of the network, and then they don't have to increase taxes because through the fee model, you're able to pay back the bond in which they got. Similar to what Mark said, they have control with respect to performance at the end of the 20-year performance period. They completely own it. They can do anything they want with it. And so that way we were able to build out 19 towns. In addition to that, last year in New Hampshire, we built out 4 CARES Act towns. In a span of 3 months, we were able to put fiber to the prem to 4 towns, because originally when the CARES Act money came out, it was allocated around September, and you had to be done by December 31st. And so that's one of the things we were most proud of. Very small town, Springfield, New Hampshire, if you've never been there, very, very small towns in New Hampshire, and we were able to build fiber that quickly. So it's one of our hallmarks. And then in Vermont, we are engaging sort of in a completely different model. They operate under communication union districts. So for the most part, with the exception of Chittenden County, the state is split up into communication union districts where they come together, and then those districts are in charge of deciding their broadband fate. And any money they seek, they have to go to the Vermont Community Broadband Board and seek money from them to build out this communication union district. And so we are currently engaged with 2 of those in the state of Vermont. We are hoping to work with 2 more. Through that, the CUDs go to the state and get a portion of those networks funded. The state of Vermont doesn't have enough money, and they recognize this immediately, to fund fiber to the prem to everyone in Vermont, and so they need ways to fill that gap, and Consolidated steps in and fills the gap, creates, through our own money, we build out the rest of the CUD. We retain ownership for the portion we fund and build. They retain ownership for the portion they fund, which we ultimately build, and then we operate those networks. They have some service quality standards. Oh, look at my typo, that's embarrassing. That should say service quality standards. They have service quality standards that the Vermont Community Broadband Board puts on us, as well as the communities, so that we are meeting what they expect with that network, so that they can monitor, like Mark was saying, they're sort of in control of their fate and what happens there. So those are just sort of 2 different ways other states have looked at it, and both of which we're happy to engage in. And then Maine. Maine is, we've done sort of everything. You name it, we've tried it and done it. We're open to meet with any community. We meet each community where they sit. Everyone is different. Some people relish the idea of ownership. We go and meet with very rural communities like the Rangeley area, and they say, we don't have any idea what we're doing. We don't want to own a network. That sounds very complicated. And so we try to meet each of them where they're at. So one of our premier projects this last year with Mark, as well as a partner, was our NTIA project. Consolidated represents about $18 million of that. We're building out the Farmington region, the Blue Hill Peninsula, and the Rangeley Lakes region. Really large projects, and very excited to announce that we turned up our first customers just last week in the Farmington area. So really monumental moment. Those communities have been really excited and looking at it for a long time. But similar to what Mark said, these take a long time. And we first started talking to the Rangeley Lakes region a year and a half before this. And they had 4 communities, 3 of them plantations, and then Rangeley being the hub. They really wanted fiber to the prem to their entire communities, and they were struggling to all get together and establish the mechanism to do that, because every select board's different, everybody's paranoid that somebody's getting a better deal than them, all the things that happen when towns come together. And magically, and Peggy Schaefer is 110% responsible for this in my eyes, came and said, hey, we have this opportunity to apply for this huge grant. Do you have any areas? And I said, yes. As a matter of fact, I have a few. And Rangeley came to the top of the list because they had been working on it so long. Similarly, the Blue Hill Peninsula, and then Farmington lined up because it lined up really well with the grants, and we're able to make it as big as it was. Consolidated's portions of these grants are completely opposite of Axiom. You know, we do things completely differently. So we tend to bring speed and money to the equation. And so we were able to make this project even bigger and leverage the federal funding that it was really big, and then also offer a very quick turnaround on build, because we currently have infrastructure on the poles. If you remember my picture before, we simply have to lash our fiber. We don't have to create new space or anything like that. We just lash over our existing fiber. And so we're able to bring that. And then Mark's part of the story is that he's able to bring these communities and these really remote islands, and it all tells the story that says, you know, we're really hooking up a diverse population of Maine. So then the other ones I've listed here: Long Island, Eastbrook, Stonington, Searsport, and Surrey, all different. Every single one of them has been different. In each case, each of those communities had a source of funding. In the case of Long Island, it was bond funding. In the case of Eastbrook, it was some wind money. Similarly, in Stonington, in Searsport, they had been working on a municipal-owned network and had some town agreement to fund part of that. And in Surrey, they're seeking some money from the county. And in each case, they're partnering with us. Consolidated is picking up a large portion of the build cost, is leveraging MCA or Connect Maine grants in most of the instances, and then leveraging the town money to put them all together to build a full fiber to the prem network, again, serving every single resident in the town, with the exception of Surrey. Surrey only wanted a particular portion built where they felt like they were really unserved. To create a situation where all of their residents are served in the manner in which they think they need to be served. And just kind of really good examples of how, with a little bit from everybody, you can get a really big thing done. We turned up Eastbrook and Long Island about 3 months ago. Stonington was at the beginning of the year. Stonington's a good one. We always call them the luckiest town in Maine. They were working with us on a small DSL project right around the time we got a capital investment, and we're switching our strategy to all fiber. And we said, hey, you know that small project you're gonna do with DSL, we're gonna make it bigger and make it all fiber. And they're like, but how much is that gonna cost us? We're like, nothing. That's how we're changing our model. So really interesting things happen when you're engaging and things change. And then finally, we're engaging with a number of communities on this latest round of grants through both the Connect the Ready and the Line Extension Program. Really cool, different ideas coming from a lot of places, sometimes just a neighborhood, an island, in other cases trying to figure out how to get huge regions of the state connected. So we're really excited for that. Perfect, my voice is running out just at about time. So that's the end of that. Any questions I'm happy to answer either now or if you want to catch up with me after. And my colleague Simon Thorne is here as well if you have any questions.
Great. Yeah, at the end of the panel, there'll be 5 to 10 minutes for group questions. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mark, no, it's okay. We can hang on to it. Mark and I go way back, so way back. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we do. Yes, we do.
So GWI, I don't have a presentation because we're sort of like the really well-done Maine blueberry muffin. Delicious, ever-present, robust, long-lasting, and driven by a desire to be memorable. That's the Maine blueberry, and that's like us. So we've been around for 27 years, providing service to all over Maine. GWI.net is our home. We're the only B Corp telecommunications carrier in the United States. What does that mean? It means that we're driven by 5 principles: community, environment, employees, vendors, and shareholders. Patagonia is a B Corp. Ben & Jerry's is a B Corp. Dannon is a B Corp. We're the only one in the United States, one of 2 in the world. That's important to us because that allows us to be able to work with my colleague over here from Maine Midcoast as community partners, as community members, as the members of the community. We're just not a other. We are a member of the community. The things that you heard from Mark and Sarah, we do all of those with various nuances. All fiber, we guarantee our speeds, transparent pricing, no data caps, no hidden fees. Everything that you've heard over here, we do the same. Everything you heard in terms of flexibility, we do that also. The thing that I do want this conversation from our side to focus on is what Sarah mentioned about utility districts, union districts in Vermont. You can also do the same in Maine. If your brothers and sisters from the next town over are thinking like you or want to think like with you, you can aggregate together and essentially create a utility district. That mechanism exists in the state of Maine, just like it exists in the state of Vermont. In the state of Vermont, we're actually working with 2 of those large ones and responsible for 60,000 passings. Every day, that's what we do there. There's no reason we can't do that in the state of Maine. And there are actually a couple of utility districts already in the state of Maine that I'd like you to hear from one of them, at least. But those are some important nuances that you hopefully can be empowered to make decisions on, because every one of these models has its pros and its cons. It has a different set of expectations on you, on your community, and also on your partner. So for us, within the context of the opportunity at hand for GWI, we believe that if there are public funds involved, the public should own that asset. That's just a core of us. We are strong proponents of net neutrality. We're part of the parcel of data privacy. We will never, ever, over my dead body and that of all GWI employees will ever sell your information. That will just not happen. But in addition to that, for example, the idea of public asset ownership carries a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of gears and mechanisms that you have to move. So for example, if in the state of Vermont and even the state of Maine, a utility district hopefully will get monies from the federal funding. In order to finish that project, however you want to do that, the utility district, you can go to essentially a revenue bond market and essentially get the other funds. Again, you can do that. And the towns are not responsible for that. You don't get taxed for it. So in either one of those models, as Mark and Sarah talked about, our little view on it is we're not as big as the larger companies, so we are looking at creative solutions, and so the revenue bond market is one of those solutions. And companies like us and others, in fact, there's a next panel discussion where there will be a conversation about that at 1 o'clock. You should hopefully go and listen to how that bond market works that is actually to your advantage. You as a taxpayer contribute to that bond market. So make sure that you have all that information. So as we talk with Deborah, you'll hear us talk about the various financial arrangements that a utility district in Maine has in order to make that project viable. So we believe in universal access. Everybody within that project should have high-speed fiber internet. That's what we believe. Everybody. And we also believe, and my colleagues are the same, so there's the ACP program that exists from the feds that allows qualifying households to get up to $30 in subsidy for their internet connection. That's enormously important. The state of Maine has about 15% of its population who are qualifying households. So when Andrew talked about take rates, or you and your community talk about what it needs to get everybody inclusive, or Carlson talks about, it's important that we don't forget there are members of our society that at the current time can qualify and essentially get subsidized internet. And that is something that we are very intentional about. So I'd like to open the conversation with Deborah. So Deborah, why don't you introduce yourself, and let's have a conversation about how we are in this adventure together, how we got together, how do you find the working relationship so far, what is your utility district up to these days, how do you guys coalesce together, what does it constitute of, what does that world look like?
Okay. So I'm Deborah Hall, and I'm the Executive Director and President of the Board for the Mid-Coast Internet Development Corporation, which we'll call the MIDC. And I've had the pleasure of working with both Mark and with Sarah, and as well as, of course, Karam. And Rockport is the one that really started off this effort, and I was the chair of the select board in Rockport, so I've seen it from a couple of different perspectives, from the town perspective as well as the MIDC perspective. And so Rockport actually put together the first municipally owned network in the state of Maine back in, what was it, 2015?
2015 was when we partnered up, yeah.
It was a partnership with GWI and others in Rockport. So in any event, I mention that because there's been a long-standing working relationship between Rockport and GWI, but also because Rockport is one of those towns that has been very intentional about what they want, what their goals are. As Carla said, you have to really know what your goals are. And we put together a coalition dating back to about 2017, 2018 probably, of over a dozen towns. And the first thing we did was we put together guiding principles. And a lot of those guiding principles were the ones that you've heard both Karam and Mark mention in terms of the benefits of public ownership. We feel very passionately about the fact that public funding should go to publicly owned infrastructure. And so we had this group of over a dozen towns that we put together, and we had Zoom calls during COVID, and ultimately we formed the broadband utility, which is a not-for-profit corporation under Maine law, and 2 towns, and then shortly thereafter 4 towns were members of the BUD. And then more recently, just in the last few months, we brought on additional towns. We now have 8 towns in the BUD. And a few of those are largely unserved towns. And it's not contiguous, and it doesn't need to be contiguous. It's, the way we look at it is we are an administrative and legal bucket, sort of, in which we try to obtain funding and provide the services that we need to for the towns that are our member towns. So we had worked with Mark on feasibility studies over the course of the last few years. Ultimately, about a year ago, GWI and we had discussions about how we could go forward together in a good, strong public-private partnership. And working with GWI has been fantastic. And through GWI, I think one of the things that's most important to us is that, when you can agree to form this BUD, you can agree to bring on members, you can agree to guiding principles, you can know where you're going. But once all that, coalesces, then of course it's the issue of how do you get the funding? What do we do now? How can we move this forward? And GWI was really the best solution for us in doing that. We are partnering with them in terms of submitting applications and the design and so forth for networks for our towns, and we're part. They will be right there with us in terms of issuing revenue bonds to get the additional funding that we need in addition to grants. We separately have a fundraising effort that we have somewhat embarked upon and are going to be continuing with more intensity.
How has it been to coalesce those different communities, and what are some learnings that you were able to employ to be able to get 8 towns sort of working together with the same kind of objective like Carlos was talking about, and making sure that stays on track?
I think it's important to have the right partners. There are some towns that were geographically close to us that we thought made sense. There were certainly residents in that town that really wanted to be part of the BUD. But at the end of the day, the select boards, maybe were not on board or they were reluctant. And then on the other hand, you have other towns like Belmont and Morrill, where perhaps these broadband was not really a priority for their select boards, not because they weren't, but it was for their residents, not because they weren't interested, but because they really didn't understand it. And so through residents coming to us saying, hey, can you help us convince our select board that we need broadband? I mean, through that kind of effort, sometimes resident driven like that, they became members of the BUD. Very quickly became members of the BUD.
Yeah. Yeah.
What convinced those select boards? What was the one or two things that made them say, what was that?
That lady right there that just walked to the back of the room, Denise, my colleague. But no, seriously, no, Denise did a great job with a couple of the select boards, and she's on the Rockport Select Board currently. I think that once they understand, first off, that this is not going to be money from the town that's required, okay? That there's no taxpayer funding that would be involved, and that's been one of our key components all along from the beginning with our pre-existing coalition. Once they realize that, they hear residents talking about the need. It used to be that you had to convince the select board of why it was important. Not so much now because of post-COVID. I think there's greater understanding among them, but they don't understand necessarily how these BUDs work and what's the next step and how do we get there. And once you show them what that process is, it's pretty successful.
And you had some resources also from the state, right? So the state actually, as part of its grant process, actually has a pool of money to have resources, capacity building, and encouragement of utility districts. So that's the Get Ready program.
Yeah,
So
we
you
never
had
had any funding from
No,
the
you did
state.
not. But
no,
so what
no.
was? How did you sort of get the gear going? Because you didn't have that advantage too.
No, we didn't. I would say that we're unique in that back when I was the chair of the select board and my colleague from Camden, who's a friend, who was the chair of the select board, we were able to convince our select boards 2 years in a row to set aside $15,000 one year, $20,000 another year, and we came up between us $35,000 apiece between Camden and Rockport. And total $70,000. And we also made a very important component of this when you're working with all these towns, is that the other towns couldn't do that. You can't say to Belmont or Morrill, hey, your buy-in is $15,000. So you have to convince Camden from the beginning and Rockport from the beginning that down the road, you're not going to request any buy-in. And then you have to maintain that all along. We're in this, for all of us are in this together. And the fact that Rockport and Camden might be able to squeeze that, $35,000 over a couple of years out of their budget, good for them. And we still have, all the money that we have, which is about $32,000 in the bank account, is all contributions from Camden or Rockport.
Great. I'm cognizant of the time, and I know there's questions, so I'd like to open it to the floor and see if anybody had questions for our participants. Please.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation. So this is really for educating myself. I come from the private sector. I've been there for many years. So I heard about, the discussion around solving each one of these issues town by town, district by district. I'm wondering if you sort of break down all the models, are there really sort of a handful of models, or are there 100 models?
I would say a handful. I don't think there are 100, because I think there are a handful which are common denominators. And what is not common is very specific to the community, or the aggregation of the community, or the goals of the community, or how does the community want to engage or not. So there's a bifurcation. I don't want to speak on behalf. There's a bifurcation. If the community wants to be involved, there's a handful of options. If the community does not want to be involved, and trust the public sector to do what it wants to do, then there's probably 1 or 2 options. So it's not a massive menu. Maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago there was, because everybody's trying to figure out what works. But I think all of us know what works within the bounds of the world that we know it. So I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think he's right. I think there's only a few. I think the sort of distinguishing characteristic for the 2 paths is how much you want to own the network and sort of be responsible for the network. And that's down one path, and we'll all engage with you in that way. The second one is, do you want to not be responsible for the network? If a storm comes in and knocks everything down, do you want to not fix that? And that is another path. And either one can be worked, and then changes come up, like they were saying, as you start working with the communities, I think Georgetown was saying that, things come up and change, and the funding comes, and now that there's more funding, it comes much easier. But that is sort of your crossroad. And then what does that mean for you? Because to me, when you have public ownership, you get a lot with that, but that tends to be delay, more time. Like, is one of your primary goals quickly people getting hooked up? Do you want to build in 3 months? That tends to be more of a private model. So there's just a series of questions about which one's more important, and both paths work, and both paths can get funded and can be done.
Sorry, go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, I think, I'm going to speak from my MCA board position perspective for a second, which is, I think part of what the work is trying to simplify those paths and make it much clearer what those paths are, and to also eliminate as many of the hurdles as there are for communities. So I think from my 5 years of leading this community charge, working with partners, I think it is imperative that we continue to find ways to simplify it for all the people here, so they understand some of the paths that they can go through, that they don't have to do what Deborah did with town by town, that they don't have to create regional perspectives, and they don't have to do what I did to go through all that. So I think that you're right, that it sounds like that, and that's part of the legacy, and what we need to do is continue to sort of really knock it down so it's much clearer how you participate, both on the private and the public sector, to move forward. So, sorry.
Nick?
Thank you. My name is Kathy Miller. I'm from the town of Mount Desert. And I just want to say great kudos to Axiom. This is the story of that business and how it evolved is such a great Maine story of, I've got a problem I need to solve. I'm going to create a company to do that.
I gave her money.
Well,
I don't
Susan
even know
Corbett
you.
is
That's
amazing
fantastic.
and
That
deserves
was nice of
great
you to
credit for
say.
all of that. And Sarah, I think you're going to be joining our little committee this coming Thursday. We're going to hear a proposal from you for our town. So I'm curious, from Georgetown and Midcoast Broadband Utility, did you come up with a plan and then put out an RFP to decide what company you want to work with? Or did you choose the company based on other criteria and move forward with them?
1,000 years ago, we put out an RFP, and at that time, and that's how we started working with Axiom. I'm going to leave it there and let Deborah speak.
Yeah, we did not, we were not required to, but I would say that we did really reach out to most of the players in the industry and talk to them. We didn't go through the formal RFP process, either when we retained Mark to do the feasibility studies for a number of the towns, nor when we decided to enter into the partnership with GWI.
The other thing to understand is it's a small group of people you would put the RFP out to, but we did it was a very long time ago when we were really trying to get our handle around the project. And again, a lot of the learning and resources that exist now did not exist then. So part of that RFP process, which actually, I can't remember, was it Islands do that? Anyway, it's so long ago now, it's fine. But part of that was really also sort of helping us define what we wanted and what the project was. So it was a very helpful process at that point. So yeah.
And I agree with Carlos that would be, at that point, a very helpful process. I think what I see, I'm kind of frustrated now because what I see is that some towns And I'm not trying to diss the RFP process, and I'm not trying to say that, towns should be doing things a particular way, but I do see some towns that could actually become members of, for example, of our BUD or go different directions and take advantage of some of the, hopefully some of the grant funding that's out there right now. And they're messing around with RFPs, and they haven't even issued the RFPs yet. So, I mean, it's like the window's closing, and they're missing it.
Yeah, I think part of that is, again, though, is the town itself sort of understanding what they want to do.
Yes,
Right.
I think you're right.
And I do think the RFP, again, every town's different on how the visibility into things. So if an RFP is necessary because the town,
Yep.
that is the way a town wants to
Yep.
progress,
Yep.
then you should follow that process. Again, follow the process that the community feels comfortable with.
Yep.
If the community feels comfortable, they can go without it, great.
Yeah.
But, I think it's part of that conversation within the town.
Absolutely, but you also, I should also add that we are a not-for-profit corporation. We are not a town, and so we have 8 member towns, and so we're the ones that would issue the RFP or not.
Yep.
So.
Nick?
Can I ask a quick follow-up here? I think this is probably for Sarah and Mark. Can you talk a little bit about the timing of when in the process it's helpful to make some of these decisions and engage you? Or, I know both of you are in a lot of communities having these conversations with a lot of communities, and then some of those projects don't move forward. Many of them don't move forward. Can you talk a little bit about when it's helpful to make some of these decisions and where not making some of these decisions leads to friction with providers?
You want to go first or me?
I'll go first, and then you. So, don't have to. You can go first. I don't care. Anyway, listen. I think that there are 2 things that should drive you today in your communities. One is the sense of urgency that's been discussed. Things are going to take a while. It's a crooked road. You have to get started somewhere. You have to do something. You have to take an action. And one of the big concerns I have in working with communities is they like to talk to themselves. So they like the 5 people in the room or the 3 people in the room. They've all talked about this for 3 years. And those 3 people know what they want to do, but nobody else does. And that expansion has to happen quickly, starting today, all of you. And so we, Sarah, anybody, any one of us can be in there and talking to you about what that means moving forward. And I think Sarah mentioned, think she said it perfectly. There's a crossroads where you decide whether or not you want to be publicly owned or you want to work with a private provider who's going to own the infrastructure. And you should answer those questions. And you should bring us in to talk about that so that we can answer those questions from our perspective, and then you can make your decisions. It's really important to engage ISPs early in the process from my perspective, really early. Earlier than ever before, frankly, because the processes that are at the state and at the federal level are so accelerated that you want to really move quickly, because as quickly and as much of money that's available today, it'll be gone 2-3 years from now, and the federal government is not coming back. So
I would just add quickly, from our perspective, you should engage us, nearly immediately. If you're going to talk public ownership, you're going to have to proceed down that path and take some votes and things, and you need to be out educating on that immediately. You need to be telling them, we're delivering a GPON service, and this is what it brings, and this is what the pricing looks like, and all those things. I mean, your community needs to know that, right? It's not TSL, it's not this. So that needs to happen immediately. And if you're pursuing private ownership with us and we have a model that works, we tend to bring the money, we tend to write the grant and do that. We've had 2 communities in this last grant round that we started engaging with not 2 months before, and we said, if you're ready to go, we'll put it in. We'll provide the financial support, and we'll get it built in 9 months. And so those are 2 questions. Once you answer that question, frankly, at this point with the money, and Mark is not lying, this will be gone. You should start and you should move.
So so if we can just take one more question, then we're all available.
Yeah.
Most of the day to have the conversation. So let's take one more question, because I know you guys got to go to the 11 o'clock session. So.
Okay, Denise Munger, Rockport, Midcoast Internet. I just have a question about long-term affordability. When we talk about digital equity and all of the things that matter for building out your infrastructure and what you think about, do you have thoughts on the long-term affordability of these systems, depending on the kind of structure you set up, whether you use a utility district, whether you go with a private company? Any thoughts on that?
Well, as you know, we certainly have a lot of thoughts on that at the MIDC, and we think that affordability, long-term affordability, is achieved through a community-driven broadband model, and I think there are others here who have indicated that as well. You know, when you don't have the pressure of returning profits to shareholders, and you're taking those profits and you're turning those back into the communities that are part of, like in our instance, the BUD, where you're expanding to other communities, or you're lowering prices. That's something that we have the ability to do as a public infrastructure, that as a privately owned company that has responsibilities to shareholders and venture capital, that can't compete long
So
term.
we have spectators, which is great. This is awesome because now they're paid for money to actually watch us, which is awesome. So I urge you to charge them for it. One last, somebody had hands up, please, before we go.
Hi. In another life, I worked in telco, and that telco was PivoTnet, cyber tours, all kinds of old technology. How are the folks that are thinking about implementing their own broadband utility thinking about obsolescence of new technology and the continual investment? We here in our area, I work for Senator Collins' office, people are worrying about plowing roads and putting up lines. In my view, just from my experience, is the real expense is keeping the technology updated because it's changing constantly.
I'll take a first crack. I think that's a great question. That consideration needs to be as part and parcel of whatever model you have. Because it's not just the obsolescence of technology you want to make sure you can maintain, replace, and keep it going. There are technologies out there that you can put your arms around and say, what is the longevity of this? And what are the replacements of it? Each of those technologies has its pros and cons. So my answer is probably cognitively biased towards fiber network. You know, people on, oh goodness. We lost the online audience. So much for that TikTok video I was going for. So in the technology like fiber to the premise, like what we do, the glass fiber optic that goes from pole to pole to pole is good for the next 60, 70, 80 years. Yep. Each one of those strands is capable of transferring a terabyte on a good day. Right now we're talking about gigabytes, 2 gigs, 10, 100. To pass that gigabyte, you don't need to change the strand. You need to change the electronics, right? When you're talking wireless, different world, where you're changing certain things to be able to spread out more. Each one of those technologies has its own pros and cons depending on the deployment, and also what do you want to accomplish in that community.
That's where I was about to go. Thank you
Right?
so much.
You're welcome. So it depends on what the goals are of that community, and what do you want to do within the model that you have. If you own the public asset yourself, then you have to make sure, okay, what are the decisions I'm taking? What's the model? What's the cost to make sure that's that? If you're having a private company help you that, you should ask that question to the private company because they're partnering with you. So there's no one blanket answer except to say that, yeah.
Nobody mentioned planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
In the models of we're going to have our own broadband utility. It needs to be.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't know I think that is true. I think it's absolutely you should be thinking about how you're going to invest in the electronics on either side. But it also does go back to the goals. I mean, are you thinking that when you're talking about what's going to happen in terms of people's use of the broadband, the use of the data, whether or not people are going to want higher speeds for each one of them over time, whether or not you're going to serve different businesses, and that's in the electronics. And I think that is part of the planning process where you talk about that. But the investment capital needs for those are less necessarily than sort of refreshing the entire infrastructure. And I think that's, again, when you're getting to that point, you're having a good conversation about what the goals of the town are beyond just, I will get you service in a year. You're getting to that point of, what will my community look like in 10 years? You know, are we suddenly going to have everybody who thought they would never use the internet are suddenly, you know, have a home business going, or they've got 5 different streams, or they're, you know, operating a software business out of their house, and that's a real world example. I mean, these are things that will happen that will increase the needs. And so having that conversation as part of your goal process is a wonderful thing and means you're actually having it, and you should have that with your provider. But that should not be the reason you stop your process. You should
Great.
include that.
We got to go.
Sorry.
Yes, everybody. Thank you so much.